Hello, so many wonderful people. Sorry. How is everybody?
Good.
I'm going to try to pull up the agenda notes and look at all these people popping in. There's a lot of content on this call, so I want to make sure that we have time. What we did on the last call, because there's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now, and some of it's really unsettling. And I was saying to Christine, it seems like it's a lot of, while we say there's a lot going on in the world, there's a lot going on predominantly in the United States on certain matters. And because we have so many people on this call, it's challenging to have everyone share openly, but in lieu of a popcorn question today, if we can maybe put in the chat, and I'll save the chat when the recording comes on, to share like a word or two about how you're arriving today. So I will put that in the chat. And I'll let everyone kind of chime in while we pull up Eric, Chad, Norris. Do we have somebody who's going to help scribe the agenda? I feel like we should have contemplative music around this. I don't know, is it Chad, are you the one leading the call today?
Yeah, so I'm gonna, thanks Cecilia. So I'll kick off here, just do a bit of so the plan for today is we're just gonna open up with a bit of a 10-15 minute intro on a topic. Obviously everything's, as Cecilia mentioned, there's some topical things happening. And one of the questions we can ask is, so what is the role of measurement during this time? So we're gonna be touching a bit on that and just seeing some global examples on how other platforms and other regions are responding. Open up for a bit of Q&A, and then just some updates on some of the projects that we've been working on, including a specific one around data and metrics, but really also seeing where the energy goes after the conversation. So we can kick off, Cecilia, whenever you feel it's good. As far as the scribe goes, I'll be talking quite a bit, so I'm not sure if I'll have the bandwidth to scribe. So I'm sure if Norris can go in, and I don't believe Eric's going to be joining us today.
Eric's on the call, but I don't know that he's anywhere where he can chime in. So, but I'll help scribe.
Thank you. Are we ready to kick off? Awesome. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming in. So I am an American from Seattle, but I'm also living in Australia at the moment. I'm in Queensland. And feel free in the chat to kind of pop in where you're from. We might also just have some opportunities to go around the room and just give some input on some of the conversation we're going to have. In preparing for today's call, we did, one of the things we were thinking of is, obviously we are all impacted by some of the immediate things that are happening right on the back of COVID-19 here in Australia. That again was on the back of the major bushfires that impacted us. And through all of that time, as ecosystem builders, as practitioners supporting things like innovation and entrepreneurship, which can have an immediate response to challenges, but quite often are more future focused, more saying, well, how do we address, some of the things that used to seem rapid as far as disruption. We used to get our industries disrupted by, the Ubers or the internet or things like that. But now it's like these impacts are happening pretty fast and furious. So what does the role of being an ecosystem builder play in a community? I'm going to go through I just threw together a few slides just for some thinking framework. And then we can open up just for a bit of a round the table conversation for about 20, 30 minutes. And then we can get into some kind of more detailed conversation around some of the projects and initiatives that are happening around this topic. So I might just share screen briefly. And say, can you allow me to share screen, please? France, 9 p.m. Hey, Christina. Thus I come from Greece. It's just after 5 in the morning here in Australia. The house is just getting going. So I'll share screen. All right, so I'm just going to throw it out there and say, okay, so what is measurement in time of crisis? And specifically looking at ecosystem builders as a trusted resource and innovation as a quote unquote safe option. So whenever anything happens, you think this is unprecedented. You're hearing terms like the new normal. Of course, we're all very familiar with kind of the concept of disruption. But these have been going for some time. You know, there's some conversations obviously around the civil unrest, but you know, just looking at some of the stats, countries rated extreme risk in civil unrest jumped from 12 to 20 just in 2019. And, you know, they expected that to continue for a range of reasons, which we won't go into now, but there's certain systemic and embedded challenges in a lot of societies in general. And these are then producing certain outcomes. As far as pandemics go, look, we are increasingly globalized. We're increasingly, you know, moving between nations. Your population is increasing, and all these factors come in, and so therefore the risk of spread of disease and things like that also increases. So the things that we're experiencing now can only be expected to go even further. I'm just going to touch base on some platform approaches that we've seen on how certain measurements systems have addressed, just say, for example, the COVID-19. And so when it hit, we saw a lot of these organizations come out and say, you know, here's some information about the topic. So Startup Genome, and for those who may not be familiar, Startup Genome is a survey-based approach focusing at the city level, where they go into a city, they release a survey with consistent questions, which then they're able to compare different cities to each other. But they don't emphasize too much on rankings. They do focus on kind of what stage is the city at, what are the different factors that go into it. So the plus side is it focuses very specifically on startups and on the system that creates and supports startups. Downside is it can be like any sort of survey type approach. It's not necessarily representative of the total population, but it does tell you something about a population. And so they came out, and there was a series of reports, and Dane Stangler, who worked at the Kauffman Foundation for a time and also was involved with Startup Genome, did some really good early work in the impacts on startups and entrepreneurs in a bear market based on some things around the GFC. And we were able to leverage a lot of that to say, what can we expect here for COVID-19 for such a dramatic impact that we expect on the economy? And so by doing that, Startup Genome then presented themselves as a bit of a trusted resource to be able to go into nations and go into cities and economies and say, okay, well, how can we help support you further? The Global Entrepreneurship Monitor is a bit of a different approach where it also compares economies, but more so at the nation level. And it's more of a sample-based approach. And so it's randomized. In Australia, we did it for 10,000 people, but it's what they call stratified, meaning it's for specific populations based on geography, gender, and age. And so you have to fill certain quotas based on the random sampling. What that means is it really gives you a representative of what that economy looks like on people's perceptions for things like fear of failure and a belief that they have the ability, and their perspectives on different aspects on is now a good time to be an entrepreneur, and do I know anyone who's an entrepreneur? And you know, am I an entrepreneur in my company, or am I one just out there doing something, and what is my rating of innovation for my business? So it has real positive aspects. That the downside, though, is it's annual, and it's very difficult to spin it up per se, because it's such a an intentional focus on getting those randomized populations unless you have somebody constantly on their phones. And even though we tried an online version, that online has to be, you know, very much, the online version has to be very much direct targeted at people. It can't just be an open slather. But they did some postings around, so what does this mean? Or the temperature check, and the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor for 2020 has some very specific COVID-19 questions. I'm going to touch on Startup Blink in that, just as an example of another platform approach that went out there and said, here's, you know, what are the startups focusing on coronavirus and COVID-19. It is very much just kind of whatever data they can collect. So it's not necessarily representative, and I'm not even sure if it's indicative, but it does go out there and say, look, here's some information about a thing, and it helps start the conversation, which is a benefit. But you know, definitely I wouldn't rely on it necessarily for rankings of any form, simply because kind of the algorithms are still being developed. But it is a good opportunity to start the conversation and have engagement. And just a really brief example of what we did here in Australia, where we were just sending out surveys pretty rapidly on a weekly basis to say, well, what does local government think about the opportunities, and what do practitioners think, and what do entrepreneurs think, and just doing some different positioning on what that looks like. The result of that is that we then started a Slack here in Australia for leaders in the innovation ecosystem or the innovation community, which grew to pretty rapidly about 850 members, and it's pretty active with about 240 leaders engaging on a weekly basis. And we're able to then engage with those people and ask them regular questions. And so, for example, we do a daily poll, and knowing that we were going to have this conversation today, I asked the question, so when you consider your role in your community as an individual and or as a representative of your organization, to what extent do you feel the wider community, not just your members or customers, would consider you a trusted resource? Predominantly, the leaders in there, you know, saw themselves as either significantly viewed as a trusted resource or you know, quite often viewed as a trusted resource. It was interesting, some of the comments though that they made in the conversation after. And some of the challenges that we face is, you know, we may be seen as a trusted resource by those that are in our community, but for the wider population, maybe not, say with the local government or the Chamber of Commerce. And also, are we positioned when something happens to be able to then provide support and be relevant? And so what I just want to put out there is, what role does data play, and to be able to then get information on impacts to business, or even just a sense check on entrepreneurs. Because the other thing I noticed is the mainstream media was absolutely hungry for perspectives. They were looking for, you know, anyone who had a survey, anyone who had, you know, an insight into what's happening during this time of crisis. And so being able to provide some of that information really helped. So I'm going to pause there, and we can talk about specific metrics and what would be measured during that time. But I wouldn't mind just rapidly, obviously being sensitive of time. So if we can keep our responses maybe to a minute or two for the next 15, just going around and saying, well, first, you know, what is your view on being a trusted advisor to your community, and what role data plays? And second, if you were to provide data in some form to your community during a time of crisis, what would that look like? You know, and how would you go about doing that? Are you doing that already? So really two different things we're looking at here. One is your thoughts on being a trusted advisor. And second is, you know, what could your response be during this time? And maybe speaking to other ecosystem builders. So we might just popcorn around a bit. And I'm looking at I think everybody's thumbnails are a bit differently, but just to my left, I have Jackie sitting there looking at her computer. So I might, Jackie, just start with you. And if you can just select somebody else talking about, one, what are your views on your role as a trusted advisor in your community? And two, if you're to provide measurement or data or support in that way, what would that look like? Keeping the answers to about a minute or two so we can get around the room. I think you're still on mute, Jackie.
How's that? Okay, there you go. Yeah, thank you. So currently I'm finishing up my PhD studies, and so I'm not as connected into the networks that I previously was, but I see myself hopefully in the nearer term replugging into what are the regional innovation networks around our province, and also back into the groups, the innovation groups who do technology transfer across Canada. And I also work with immigrants, women immigrants who speak French. So several and municipal startups that are forming Main Street businesses through engagements with being hired by the city. So I see myself as a thought leader, and the type of data, I think, from what I've seen to be asked by media recently, it seems to be providing some creative ideas on how the business model can be kind of rethought, how to innovate, what kind of what would be some of the areas that might be of interest. So I'm not sure if that's the type of answer you're looking for.
No, that's perfect, Jackie. And really, two things I picked up on that. One of them is the fact that you're doing your PhD and that you really want to help communities. There's a lot of other practitioners out there that would look at you and say, wow, you're gold. Can you help us with our measurement approach? And the second part is really providing some insights, not just entrepreneurship in general, but really like female immigrants, or really that niche also creates a really interesting story to be able to collect data around that particular point. And I guess the more niche it is, the less detailed it needs to be, and that if you just get an opinion piece about a niche audience versus really detailed information about the wider audience. And so that's really good perspective. I appreciate that. Who would you like to go next, Jackie?
How about CJ? He's just by my side, so.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you allow me to lurk here? I'm multitasking with trying to return a computer here, so I apologize.
No, it's all good, CJ.
Otherwise, Christina. She's beside CJ.
Hello, everyone. I was saying that I'm extremely excited to be here, and this is the first time, but I really appreciate the initiative. ESHIP, I'm trying to understand and explore a little bit. And I'm happy to contribute. So I did my PhD on entrepreneurial ecosystems. I defended it in 2017, and I received the 2 best dissertation awards. And actually I did both qualitative and quantitative studies. And my question was how I can measure the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So this is a big question, and how we can measure this complex phenomenon. So I heard about the GEM data, and I think it's quite interesting. I saw also this perspective from a city and the startups, the tools they have, and all this, how they create value from startups and innovation. And I remember I went a lot of times in the Babson conference, and there was a colleague working on how to measure the city level entrepreneurial ecosystem. And he was trying to identify a measurement to classify cities all over the world. And actually, my questions that every time I went and hear this person, I was asking the same question. I have still the same question. I haven't responded it. Is because they try to identify all the components of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, what makes it successful. So we identify policymakers, startups, every element of the ecosystem. And we're trying to identify if there are enough in each city and how we can measure it. However, it doesn't mean because this element they are in one place that they work efficiently. So actually the ecosystem is about the interaction, how they create this relationship between them, and how they create value. So I don't know if there is a measurement today from the database that allows it to do that. What I did is that I tried to measure the perceptions, and I think I'm not sure if what you have done also in Australia, asking people how they evaluate the environment in which they live in. Is there enough attractive? So I think it's a nice measurement. However, I'm wondering if it's still enough. And the question I have today is because I'm in France, in the south of France. In France, there is one big region, it's called Occitania. And in Occitania, we have two big cities. One, there is service-based economy, Montpellier. So as you don't have industry, you need to create startups from services and health and be very vibrant. So Montpellier is everything, something happening. If we ask about the perceptions, everyone will tell that something is happening. And in Toulouse, there's completely different. There is a hard industry with aeronautics, and there is less vibrant, but the value is more. So I'm wondering what is the outcome? So how we can measure that? So is it about something is happening, or what is the value of the ecosystem? I don't know if.
No, that's good, Christina. One of the things I'll pick up on there, like perception is really important, and it's one of the core aspects of GEM, the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. And as well, I would also say one of the things that I've learned over the last 8 weeks or so is not having to get it right. You know, kind of eating our own dog food, as they say with the startups, and just throwing questions out there. If I want to know perception, you know, just throwing it to people and say, hey, we're having riots in the street, but like things are really challenging at the moment. We have a bit of a crisis. What are your perceptions on how this impacts entrepreneurship right now? Keeping in mind people are stressed, there's a lot of challenges, but finding a way to just get a data set to get that initial gut reaction. And if we get it wrong one day, if we do it rapid enough, next day we can try something different. But really just, it's, I guess, ramping up the sense of data collection to match the current context could potentially be something. But I do like your thought around the perception. That's good. CJ, you did just pop in and say that you're ready to go. You want to give a quick 2-minute overview?
Oh, sure. Well, there's a lot of information here on measurement, et cetera. Being a bit of a jaded veteran, I'll make a comment, particularly in our state. We've got some very active ecosystems, but the problem with measurement is that there's no standard, number one. And number two, I find that the organizations doing the measuring and reporting are the ones that are benefiting from the positive results. And that tends to just by the nature of the system, set it up for skewed results. And I have a big issue with that. And I think this is one of the reasons why I'm participating on this, is that if there was some sort of set of standards or best practices, then no one can ignore factors that make their ecosystem look bad, or no one can highlight factors that would make it unusually look good. And because I find that that's a big problem, and because it bolsters or hides problems and bolsters mediocre communities, because folks love to showcase positive data rather than data that can indicate areas for improvement. So to put it simply is that. So I think I'm hoping that's one of the reasons why this initiative exists, because I find that every ecosystem, whether it's at the city level, accelerator level, university or state level, comes out with these impact reports or cherry picks data to, you know, make themselves to portray a story that sounds good, but it's not going to be useful.
Yeah, that's a great point, CJ. And it comes back to that trusted role, trusted advisor position, and that if there's any sense of bias, if they start sniffing around that there's an agenda or something, you know, like what, as you mentioned, like governments starting to produce their own data on how their economy is doing, it can be suspect. Whereas our role as a trusted advisor of ecosystem builders, obviously having to mitigate whatever our funding sources are, can play that role to be able to provide that. That's a good point. Now, Kristen, you did mention that you got a very, go ahead, Cecilia.
I was going to say, Chad, so I'm a novice to Mentimeter, but I do actually, I'm trying to put one of these together so we can try it with the 2 questions that Christine helped put in here. So which is, what role does data play in your ecosystem? And can I share screen now let's see if we can do this. So let me see if I can share my other screen. Otherwise, it's actually, if you go to menti.com and use the code, which I will type here. And let's see if we can make this work. So you're all like guinea pigs on this, and I'm going to try to share my screen and share. Hold on. Whoops. That's not it. Okay. So here is the Mentimeter thing. Eric, you and the team at Forward Cities have done this more than I have. How do I show how it's presented?
Oh, good. Boy, yeah, I wish I could.
I've got Eliza and Stacy and all these wonderful, brilliant people from your organization here. So,
yeah, there's. I mean, I don't know that you want to share all your screen territory.
No, there you go.
Yeah, there's usually something in the Mentimeter.com that allows you to click on present.
Okay, so it's presenting.
Yeah, well, you usually put that on a screen and then you share that screen.
So here's where it is. So
right now we're seeing an email from you to someone.
Okay, so that's not good. All right. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
We still see the email.
I still see the email. Sorry.
Yeah. No,
yeah,
we're
okay. Let's see if we can do this.
We may want to hold off on that for a second, but I can get with you kind of in a side chat and figure it out if you like.
Yes. Sorry. I'm going to try to do it one more time. Okay. Look, it's coming up. Does that work?
Yes.
Okay.
There you go.
Great.
That's
Sorry.
what we're seeing.
See, everything's a draft. Thank you for all indulging. Does that? All right, Chad, you want to keep going with some of these?
Yeah.
Or
yeah,
ask
so I just want to,
whoever to.
Yeah, I just want to keep going around the room because like one of the things we say with these things is the wisdom's in the room. So feel free to add your voice to the Menti, and we can touch base on that as we go through as well. But Kristen, you mentioned, you popped into me and just said, look, I've got a very specific answer as well. So maybe if we can just keep our responses to a couple of minutes, just so we can get around the room as much as possible in the time that we have. That would be great.
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
Can, yeah.
Yeah, so in general, we're working as an ecosystem developer out in Peoria, Arizona, which is it's a suburb of your Phoenix area. And so we had an existing relationship with the city. And they were very quick when COVID hit to kind of come to us and say, how do we address this? And so from the get-go, we really had an ecosystem approach to solving the COVID-19 challenges that businesses were facing. The reality is that a piece of the challenges in Peoria, the majority overwhelming of businesses were still small businesses, kind of mom and pop businesses. And so the data that they were really looking for, which has been a struggle that I wish we would have been able to pull a little bit more, is I have seen in many of those groups this kind of discussion of who is hurting, what are the challenges. There's an overwhelming want to help, but there's never been such an awareness of the gap between what the government understands and can do and what the real needs of the small business owners and entrepreneurs in the communities were. And so we were able to kind of bridge that gap since we didn't have a lot of that data with ad hoc committees. We've done a ton of just kind of organic outreach. We helped them execute over 3,500 phone calls out to every small business owner and person who had a business license out there. So we were able to do just a lot of that kind of iterative process, how to gather data, get feedback. We quickly identified, here we think are 3 projects. Cool, let's run like a startup and call and kind of validate. Do these sound like good projects? Great, how do we move them forward? So it was not so much on we didn't have the bigger data pieces that, you know, we would like to have, but because we are a suburb of a major metropolis, data has always been our challenge. And instead we kind of were able to instead figure out how do we still use the entrepreneurial process. And we even leveraged a lot of our ecosystem. In those 3,500 calls, we pulled mentors and other incubation clients. And we actually had high school students that we've been working with. Everybody was kind of doing the outreach. So we were able to really leverage that both entrepreneurial approach and the ecosystem to make a pretty quick response out there. And now I'm proud to say they've rolled together some really great programs, but the design thinking, I think, was also, it was just a very organic. Today I've got another call with the mayor's chief of staff. She's using it every day now in these conversations she's having with small business owners around how do I pivot this discussion to solutions and what it looks like moving forward. So we've seen a couple of really good easy low-hanging fruit that they were able to get some really good traction off the bat. And now they're starting to look at, okay, longer term, how do we develop some of the bigger solutions that our community is going to need? And I would say that the biggest data gap we currently have is because we don't have some of those specifics around. A lot of the business owners are looking at us and saying, I don't know how to pivot. There's kind of a dead split between them in the room that they think there's this, nothing's going to change. We just have to wait this out. And then this other one that says, nope, the world has finitely changed. We have to pivot everything. And so there's kind of this like locked debate going back and forth that we're kind of trying to use design thinking around to get them out of. But it's been an interesting role as not only an ecosystem builder ourselves, but also helping facilitate the city of Peoria as an ecosystem builder now and helping them navigate those waters.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kristen. And a lot of really good points you raised there. And one of them is around like it's adding value and proving that value through the crisis, which then actually starts building that capacity ongoing. And then people just get used to using you as a trusted resource. We are seeing that in a few other areas where they're starting to collect the data. And then because of that value, say, oh, that's what you do. Whereas before, without the crisis, people are like, well, what do you do again? And how are you helping? So we're seeing a bit of that. Kristen, I might just leave it to you to pick our next one as we go around the room as much as we can.
Sure. It looks like Jen.
Jen.
Hey, sorry, I had to get to the unmute. Coming to you from Canada. Hope everyone's doing well and feeling well. So I've seen several. Let's try again. I've seen a few initiatives locally that have been implemented to measure the immediate impact, as well as try to understand ways that we can support the community. I've seen definitely universities stepping up, as well as the greater ecosystem builders. There was a collaborative survey that went out, which was tremendously beneficial. And I think the collaborative piece played such an important role in developing that trust. Our city is in a unique position in that well before COVID, we were in economic trouble. We're an energy city facing major challenges. So fortunately, we have developed collaboration well before COVID. And I think now what we're seeing is that all those efforts come into play. So that was really important. The other thing is that my colleagues have developed an initiative called Bounce Back YYC to support the experience economy. So that ranges from music festivals to restaurants to sporting events such as horse jumping and the Calgary Stampede. And there's 3 pillars to that: research, so collective research, hackathons to get people acting, and work integrated learning to get the students engaged and employed. So just to summarize, I would say that we're absolutely seeing many surveys going out, which sometimes leads to survey fatigue. So hopefully people are recognizing that we want to consolidate the efforts and make sure we're on the same page, and that has empowered us to see some of the immediate needs and the immediate impact, specifically job loss, and then the need for immediate funding. And then also making sure that we're working together as a system. And I would say that our entrepreneurship community has now extended our impact into the SME community. because those organizations absolutely need to be entrepreneurial during this time, as we're not going back to a normal, we're going to something new. So hopefully that answers
Excellent,
your
Jen.
question.
It is. It's perfect. You raised some really other interesting points to add to the conversation around, one, the need for collaboration, but also the risk of survey fatigue. Like we're having this conversation, everyone in our region everyone wants to throw the data out, but actually using that data collection as a point to bring people together around the data. But then I love how research and data inherently is one of the three pillars of moving forward for that. So that's good. Stacey, I want to hop over to you because you did make the comment, and love to hear what you're doing in your community, but also, speaking to that thing, which I think a lot of us have seen during this, where people do get the idea to throw a survey out of varying qualities, and everybody's, asking the business that's just trying to keep the lights on, hey, how are you doing? How can I help? How's this disrupting you? Like, mate, I kind of got to take out the trash and keep things going here.
We've received comments just like that, right? Like, I really don't have time to take another survey. One of the things, so we have activities in a lot of cities going on. And one of the things now when somebody comes to me, so I'm the director of research and evaluation at Forward Cities, when somebody says, hey, let's do a survey to do a needs assessment, my immediate response is somebody else collecting data that's similar? Can we collaborate with them? Or do we need to do something from scratch? And the second piece is, what is going to happen with this data? Is there an action plan? So are we saying, okay, tell us what you need and now we're going to give it to you? And we're going to help you find the right places to get this information. One of the benefits that we have is in each of our cities, we've been working with a number of ESOs, or entrepreneur support organizations, across the city. And so we're often well suited to help point people in the right way. And when I say we, I mean at this point, our local folks, our local directors, our local collaborators. One of the things that I think has been really interesting to watch is the overload of data collection that comes at the beginning of a crisis when everybody wants to help, and it's all with the best intentions, but helping folks collaborate on data collection and then collaborate on the efforts to solve these problems is key. Another thing that I think that we've done pretty well with is working on telling stories of hope and resilience. So that includes stories of particular business owners, what it's looked like for them, and then also stories of collaboration across ESOs. So I think in one of our ESHIP communities in central New Mexico, there was a story, and I'm not going to get it quite right. Perhaps Eric, you can jump in here after I finish, where multiple ESOs came together to really start to meet the needs that came up in the crisis situation. And so qualitative data and giving people a good picture of the potential of hope, possibilities for collaboration and working together, I think is a really great opportunity that we all have.
Thanks for that, Stacey. And you raise up a couple of really good points with regards to the reliability and the consistency of the data collection process, because there's a whole bunch of attention happening at the beginning of a challenge, whether it's COVID or unrest or whatever, but then who sticks around months after? And really that's where people start to trust that consistency. That's a really good point.
Right, right.
And so, like you did just do a shout out to Eric. Eric, are you online and are you available just to have a quick chime in?
I'll do a very quick chime in. And I think one thing that Stacey's referring to is one of our regions. How can I put it? I think what really helped was that one of our regions was already coming together, already had some things that were really together, and we were part of a process that, because we were working on food system framework, food models in our, the northern half of New Mexico, since that was already happening when COVID struck, that response to food security problems, challenges, was almost already in place, and we and a lot of other people helped, to help move that forward. So, and that's one thing that I think I've really seen across the country is the ecosystems that already have their act together in some way are so much more capable of responding because they have the ability to, see who's collecting data, and they have the ability to collaborate versus collaborating from scratch when it's a crisis. It can happen. Sometimes it does happen well, but it's really so much more useful if folks are already together.
Yeah, it's a really good point as well, Eric. It really is a balance. And we see this with businesses, a lot of the businesses who, went online, they weren't online before during the crisis, that they already had some of the pieces in place. Other ones who had just had no digital skilling in any way, then all of a sudden they say, hey, sell to a global market, not local. They really struggled. Similar kind of thing for ecosystem builders. But on the flip side, it also positioned that say, as the saying goes, never waste a good crisis. And so, there's this social theory around the force field effect where, it's this change process of unfreeze, shift, refreeze, very simplistic approach. And quite often it's hard to affect the change, hard to get collaboration when we're all just kind of frozen in place. So when we're all frozen, when we're all thinking, oh, we're looking for answers, that also may be a time to say, well, we want to collaborate for some time. Let's give this one a crack, and maybe data might be the way to do it. So both of them are good, but that's a really good point, Eric, on kind of building on that existing momentum. We got about 8 minutes left before we start getting into some project details. I might just put it out there. There's been a few people commenting. Alistair, I might just throw to you just for a couple of quick points.
Pava raised her hand.
Pava raised her hand. All right, well, we'll hop over to Pava, then maybe Pava you can throw over to Alistair after that. That'd be great.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll go really quick. And I know I did the whole inappropriate, like actually raising my hand instead of using the button. My bad. But I just thought it was like really interesting listening in on the conversation because like pretty much all of our work is in terms of the resource side of data and not in the like venture measurement side. And I think it's really interesting to watch how these two like things interplay because I know, Chad, you work in a similar area when you're looking at like what are the resources that are available for communities. And I know there was, some comments about like both survey fatigue and the consistency of data. And I think it's really interesting that when you're like, if you're working with, looking at resource data, a lot of times, at least our approach is that we don't actually like go out and send out surveys to any of the businesses. It's all, the business service providers, what we can find about them online. And then any asks that we do are just kind of like filling in the gaps later. And as I've said on previous calls, that tends to get a lot better of a response in terms of data quality than asking like BSOs to fill it out from scratch. And then what that kind of allows us to do is turn around and say, okay, we don't have the data about, what these individual businesses need, but from an ecosystem perspective, we can see where these gaps are. So we have data sets now for Baltimore, Birmingham, and Dallas, which we're, almost completing. And we can see, compared to the demographics of that area, how do all of the resources for startups compare to those for small businesses? How do the resources for female and minority founders compare to those that aren't focused on those groups? And it lets us get a really interesting perspective on that. And it's helpful because we're in control of all of the data collection process. So we know at least our measurement is consistent. And so I think it's an interesting differentiation to make between the differences in data collection when you're looking at the resource side versus the actual business side and kind of the strengths and weaknesses of both those approaches. So
yeah, I'll just touch base on it real briefly. That is awesome because it speaks to a kind of a portfolio approach to doing it as well. Because definitely the resource bit, not at the expense of, but potentially in addition to the individuals as well and the businesses, but kind of painting that whole picture as you do. But I love the kind of the taking it at the economy section as you're doing with your platform. That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, it just provides like a nice comparison, especially I know, and I'll turn it over to Alistair right now, but like, for example, in Baltimore, like the city office wouldn't believe us when we said that there was not enough resources for, females and minorities until we handed them a data set of every resource in Baltimore. And we were like, look, y'all, 10% of these are for females or minorities. And it was only then when there was enough like political will to act. And so I think it's like really interesting, like what the power you can do with data when you're able to go say like, look, we know this is the case. But for now, throw it over to Alistair.
Well, I put my thinking into the chat. Some of you are familiar with it. I won't go into details, and I'm going to transfer the rest of my time to those who are new to Group 5 and may wish to speak.
Awesome. Thanks, Alistair. Definitely one of the thought leaders in complex adaptive systems, the complexity, if you get a chance to follow up and read through his comments there. Might just throw it out there to have somebody unmute themselves and pop in if anybody who's burning to have a last comment. Probably got time for 2 more.
Well, I got to say, this is echoing Eric's comment in the chat. This has been marvelous. The idea of the trusted advisor that, data
I mean, in the old days of economic development, being the source of good data is definitely a value prop for a lot of that. The media is hungry. Every time I write something for the local press, they want to know when the next one is. I'm hoping that just isn't because they're desperate, but that there is competing data that is sometimes a concern. Like here, the big issue is there are people saying we only should talk about data about how we should be chasing unicorns, that everything has got to be high tech, high touch. And even nationally, there's a lot of data with that, essentially a bias in that direction. Because the bias metrics are bad, but bias to whom is figuring out what is and isn't self-serving. Christina made a point in the chat about that we have to give them the bad news. And I don't know who mentioned that, but the reaching out and aligning with the SME community is important. Again, on the national scene, there are policy initiatives saying we should support entrepreneurs, we should not support small business. And I'm baffled by that, but it's apparently it's a thing. Kristen, about the getting companies to pivot, SBA did a study of who came out of the last recession rocking and rolling and who didn't, and there were some very clear patterns. And the winners rethought everything about their business. They may not have pivoted, but they did innovate. They did. They questioned all of their assumptions, and that was just such an overwhelming pattern, and they fully expect that to happen again. The other thing about data is sort of parallel to his expertise. I watched a webinar on how to pivot in this new environment online locally, and my God, it was awful. Oh God, design thinking gone bad. It was that if we don't have the expertise, in our communities, we know who are the great people at design thinking, the great people at lean, and maybe there's a way that we can marshal. That's a resource that maybe we don't always think about. Who are the 3 best people in Albuquerque, the 3 best people in Peoria at design thinking, at blue ocean strategy, whatever the tool is. I think that's really that's an area where we can make a huge difference. Anyway, and I got like a whole page of ideas to borrow. So I will shut up now.
That's great, Norris. Thanks heaps. And I might just use that to kind of wrap it up a bit. I might just summarize a few points that we've come up. And again, one of the things that we say in these groups and any facilitation is the wisdom's in the room. Like all you guys, from what you just said, like you are the experts, which is really one of the values of these calls is bringing collective experts together to have that collective impact and create a bit of that structure around how we do this, not just for the US or even for Australia, but globally. Things that were raised, how do we need to be aware of an agenda and any sort of perceived bias in the data we collect? How do we use the data to tell the story? How do we compete versus competition versus collaboration and avoiding that survey fatigue? Using data and expanding the audience. Reliability and consistency is needed to build that trust, building on the existing momentum that's already there for people that are already collaborating. And also a couple of the paradigms in our portfolio approach. One of them is measuring resources as well as individuals. And also, as Norris said, leveraging some of the SBA data that's there for the hard government data, as well as maybe the softer survey type approaches. And finally, on that point, it is a skill set. And so that's also where the trusted advisor part comes in, is that we are, when you look around the room and see who else is trying to do this stuff, pretty rapidly we become the experts in the room to be able to support the region, even if we don't feel like it necessarily at the time. So I do really appreciate everybody's contribution. If we have any time left at the very end, but I'm conscious we got about 9 minutes left. What I'd love to do now is just update on a couple of the projects we've been working on. And Norris, I might just turn over to you on some of the relationship with that you've been developing there, and maybe just give us a brief, 3 or 4 minute update on that. You're on mute, Norris.
Why am I so bad at that? We had Christine and Annika and Beth joined us on a webinar we did for the International Council for Small Business. If you haven't heard of them, they're a global academic organization for entrepreneurship that also includes practitioners and particularly policymakers. They're deeply tied into the UN, the ILO, the IMF, the IFC, you know, sort of the whole alphabet soup. They put together the UN's Global Small Business Day, which the UN, of course, converted to the Global Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprise Day. Can't remember anything simply. On June 27, there's some opportunities for ESHIP to get involved in that. Ping me if I can share more about that. The big thing is that they came to us, that they looked at our canvases, they looked at our goals and said, okay, how can we help? You know, what do you need to move these projects forward? You know, whether it's brain power, whether it's, because they have some astonishing array of people. You know, is it data? Is it other resources? Is it money? That tell us, how much money do you need? We'll help you go raise it. You know, after I stopped weeping in joy for about 5 minutes, we've been having an interesting conversation. I had sent a message to all of the goal champions. If you've got a project that you want on the wish list for ICSB, they'd be very excited. They've looked at our NRP list and they see some people they really like and some people they really hate, but that, you know, that's not terribly surprising. But I think there's a huge asset. They are biased, given their background, they're biased toward Goal 5. The two things that they are from Goal 5 that they're very interested in is that the project about building a survey platform and doing regular surveys, whether it's a variation on GEM, a variation on PSED, variation on the NFIB monthly pulse taking survey. You know, that's something well worth exploring, but they can provide the platform. They can also provide the people who designed GEM that we have some tremendous, they're very interested in that. They're already involved in Goal 5.3, the meeting of the minds. They were a participant. They helped a little on last year, the one that Christina wave. Where's Christina? The wave. We had a brilliant research workshop at the Academy of Management last year in Boston, which had 80 people from 20 countries, a mix of young scholars, senior scholars, and practitioner and policy people. It would not have happened as brilliantly without Christina as it might have. We were supposed to be doing it again in August and at the Academy of Management, but it's now gone virtual. We still haven't heard we're kind of hoping they don't ask us to do virtually, then Christina and I can do something even more, even better. The ICSB also has a policy research conference in October, and they said, let's get some ecosystem builders there for that. That should be very, very exciting. I would be remiss, they did like, one thing from goal 6 or 7 was the Andy Stoll's idea of assessing, you know, what is the ecosystem builder mindset? And so we've got a lot of resources for that, and ICSB is drooling on that one, so I'm excited. They also loved the storytelling stuff. Annika charmed the socks off them. So there's people got resources, there are things going forward. Christina and I will be back in touch with, once we get the final word on what the hell's happening with the Academy of Management and it should be very exciting. But again, these are people who are get or done. If you don't have the money, we'll go find it. And I think we should take that as a huge opportunity. And Christine had the thought that if one NRP, like somebody like that steps up, others will do as well. And I think I will stop there. I think we may have lucked into something pretty remarkable. So let's get her done.
Awesome. Thanks, Norris.
But there is one other cool project, and that's the one Chad's put together. So I want to make sure there's time for you to hear about that one.
Yeah, thanks for that. And as we know from the entrepreneurs that we support, luck happens to those who, put a heck of a lot of hard work, effort, and time in. So really appreciate you following through with that. And that also speaks to kind of some of the more structural opportunities that we have, like this, the ESHIP in general, and even with different goals. As we produce outcomes and develop consistency, people start noticing. And so it's good to start getting some of that validation. So the other project I'll just briefly touch on is around definitions. One of the challenges that we have, even to this day, what is a startup? What is an entrepreneur? What is a job? What is a business? And everybody here probably has an answer, just like everybody else, like the nose on our faces. We've all got them. And there's a lot of academic journals, and so those answers have been tied up in some research paper, and the platforms themselves have different definitions for it. So what we're doing is we're working on a project to not necessarily define the terms themselves, but define the process by which those terms are established, create a consortium, a global consortium of people that can come together and address that and say, so how do we go about it? And then stress testing that by throwing a term at it. And then, but we're more interested in the process by which that term gets validated and put into canon, but then also the opportunity for that to be challenged as we go. Innovation ecosystems as a construct, as a concept, is only a few decades old. The concept of a startup has kind of solidified into what it is now in a very loose form over the last, say, 5 or 8 years. And it constantly is challenged by new approaches to doing things in new ways. And so we need to keep it fluid, but also have some sort of consistent process by which we define it. So that is in play. The next, I've done a survey which is available on Slack if anybody wants to contribute. The main way we're managing this at the moment is through the Slack channel. If you're not on there, please engage with that. There's a survey out at the moment. There's a doodle poll, and I believe that the meeting's this week. So I need to get that out there to hopefully people are still available. But I'll put that out. And if not, if I'm too late on that one, then I'll reschedule for next week, but hopefully we'll be able to get to that pretty quick, where I'll give you some more details on the outputs of the Slack, and then we can workshop and brainstorm for next steps. So that's the status of that one. Go to the Slack. We can have a conversation about it there. I really do appreciate everybody's engagement and time and wisdom. Like we said, like no single one of us have the answers, but collectively, I think we can get pretty darn close. So thanks all. Let us go about 30 seconds early. And
wait, no, you can't go.
Celia's saying no.
Share a couple of things. For those of you who do not know, the ESHIP Summit will be virtual. It's September 15th and 16th. So you'll all have an opportunity to be involved. We will be sending out a call for presentations, and so think about the things that you want to share with the world. Like what is it that you want to share with the world about ecosystem building? And that may be, I don't know, Christine and I will talk about that as we talk on our team call about maybe figuring out how we can take in that information, like a one sentence thing and then maybe a bigger thing. So now that I kind of know that I might be able to do, if I could share my screen, Mentimeter, I will invite the ESHIP champions to maybe work with me on getting those questions framed sooner so that we can create those tools to interact well. But I really love the opportunity to hear from all of you. That was wonderful. So that question that I want to send you all away with is, what is it that you wanted the world to know about ecosystem building? So think about that, because as we go to a virtual conference, there will be an opportunity to share out with a bigger audience in a bigger way what this whole thing is. And all of you keep telling us it's a thing and we just want people to notice. Well, tell them what it is so that they take notice. So thank you all for your time and energy. The dashboard, Christina, where you got the email, on the dashboard, there's a link not only to Slack, which I've put in the chat, but also to the Facebook page. And, you know, there's a lot of information on there. So follow your energy. It's good to see you all. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
See you guys.